After years of using Google to successfully search for everything from song lyrics to pot roast recipes, it appears we finally learned that there's one thing that Google can't find: a winning strategy for their now defunct streaming game service, the Google Stadia. Launched by one of the largest and most ubiquitous names in technology on the planet, Stadia promised to deliver a AAA gaming experience that could compete with the likes of Microsoft and Sony, Nintendo, and Steam, all without the expensive price tag of a console or a high-end gaming PC.
The good news is that Google's take on a streaming service seemed to deliver on many of its promises,
Sure.
allowing participants to play many of gaming's most prestigious titles anywhere they choose to play. Bad news is that after 3 short years, Google's dream of owning a piece of the lucrative gaming marketplace it's over.
While there's a large number of reasons why Stadia was unable to find a path to sustained relevance, there's fierce competition. They launched before all of their features were available. There were limited exclusives. There's a lack of internal game development. They failed to grow their user base. We can go on and on, but there's one central reason that Google Stadia has had its plug pulled once and for all, and it may not be what many of us may have originally thought.
The reality is that Google, the parent company for Stadia, had more than enough money to continue propping. They have all the money in the world to continue propping this service up until it finally found its footing.
Last time I checked, they have a value of like over $400 billion. It probably went up another several $billion while we're recording this. So while this is certainly a disappointing setback, I think the company will be just fine. I just used Google to search for something a few minutes ago. It still seemed to be its normal, cheerful self. It even offered me cookies, but I blocked them. And all of the users of the service who made full game purchases, they can follow a process to have these refunded to their original method of payment, a full refund. That's a pretty nice gesture and an expensive one. So the actual pain of this is being felt most deeply by the developers, not the gamers, because these were the people who either partially or fully committed their resources to building games on that platform. And there isn't a simple path to recouping their losses on this promising gambit.
So, if Google isn't going broke,
no, they're fine,
and they even had enough resources to refund gamers' purchases,
every single one of them,
and Stadia actually showed signs of promise,
it wasn't that bad.
Then why is it gone?
For one simple reason. Google didn't accurately count the cost of this endeavor from the onset of the journey. So once Stadia reached a point that was more than Google was willing to continue to invest, it was easier for them to simply pull the plug, count their losses, and move on. And while the gaming world will briefly pause to mourn yet one more abandoned platform, it will trudge on. Stadia will forever exist as a mile marker on a road that nobody travels on anymore. And it will serve as a very expensive reminder that even those with the deepest of pockets, failing to properly count the cost only ends in heartbreak and loss.
Counting the cost can be a challenging part of our real-world lives as well, especially when it relates to our spiritual commitments.
It can be easy as believers in Christ to mistakenly intertwine the concept of grace being free, which it is, with the act of following Christ, which carries the exceptionally high cost of absolute surrender, which you see in Luke 14:33. But the idea of cost can be quite misunderstood because of the nature of how we tend to perceive transactions in general. In Luke 14:27-33, we hear Jesus saying, "Whoever does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it, lest after he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it will begin to mock him, saying, 'This man began to build and was not able to finish.' Or what king, going to make war against another king, does not sit down first and consider whether he is able to meet with 10,000 him who comes against him with 20,000? Or else while the other is still a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks conditions of peace. So likewise, whoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple."
This is certainly not a series of verses that tend to get, put on a t-shirt or bumper sticker. But it is as important as any of the messages that Christ shared with those who wanted to follow him. Christ was not interested in being followed because of the miracles he performed or the power of his messages. He was seeking informed followers who fully understood what they were committing to and accepting of what it would ask for them in return.
While many of us are absolutely willing to pay any cost associated with the equitable receipt of goods and services, that is not the way the Lord's economy tends to work. As a matter of fact, it is clear through both the Old and the New Testaments that accounts of those who chose to follow the Lord will often be asked to make far more deposits into the kingdom of heaven than withdrawals on this side of eternity, and will rarely have the opportunity to see the quantifiable success of our efforts until after our journey's end.
The prophet Jeremiah was charged with preaching an unwelcome message to an unreceptive audience for the entirety of his ministry, foretelling the fall of Jerusalem in his generation. His cross, to preach from a position of pain and imprisonment before finally being forced against his will to join his people on an exodus to Egypt that they would not return from in his lifetime.
Ezekiel was shown visions beyond our comprehension, but he was also tasked with painfully enduring the loss of his beloved wife without even the luxury of mourning her passing as a component of his ministry. The Apostle Paul, he certainly had quite a bit to say about the matter. In 2 Corinthians 11, he said, "From the Jews 5 times I received the 40 stripes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I've been in the deep, in journeys often, perils of waters, robbers of my own countrymen, Gentiles, in the city, in the wilderness, in the sea, in perils among false brethren, weariness and toil, in sleeplessness, often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and nakedness." Sounds like a terrible Dr. Seuss poem. "Besides the other things will come upon me daily, my deep concern for all the churches."
It's a lot.
It's a whole lot.
That's more than I've ever been through.
It would be a terrible LinkedIn profile.
Oh my goodness. All right, so let's get back to Google for a moment. Obviously, they knew that launching an entirely new streaming platform would neither be cheap nor easy. They were prepared to invest into the concept, but it was with an expectation of seeing a new revenue stream develop that would indicate it would offset the costs and eventually turn into profits.
Their entire strategy was predicated on an assumption of success within certain targeted measurements, and when counting the cost, they did not accurately prepare themselves for the amount of time or the depth of the expense it would take to achieve them. When the cost of the moment became too high, they simply closed up shop. And while that sounds like good business sense, if they had properly read the room, they would have known this eventuality was coming, and they would have either never launched in the first place, or they would have done a better job preparing themselves for the inevitable storms that were on the horizon before taking on such a task. And within the sad fall of this promising service is a critical lesson for us all.
While our forgiveness of sins and reconciliation with the Father is a free gift of grace that we can never earn, Jesus was always abundantly clear with all who would choose to follow him that walking this path would come at a cost. While that cost will be measured differently for each of us, it will always come in the form of a cross that we must choose to carry. And many times we will not understand the purpose for our cross or be able to see the value in carrying it at the time.
For Noah, it took the form of building a giant boat at a heavy cost, while those around him mocked its seemingly needless purpose. For Paul, it meant giving up his personal desires and pursuits so he could live that life of sacrifice, sowing the seeds and writing the letters that would one day form the basis of most of our Christian doctrine. David said it best when he declined to follow a path without price in 2 Samuel 24, when he said, "I can't offer my God a sacrifice that cost me nothing."
Launching the Google Stadia was always going to be an uphill climb, and as their fellow gaming competitors have found, we must be prepared for multiple losing seasons before finding lasting success.
And companies like Microsoft have endured massive losses for years in order to build the Xbox brand and marketplace. Steam had to completely rebuild the concept of a PC marketplace at their own cost to provide an infrastructure that was previously non-existent. Nintendo had to thwart numerous hungry competitors and constantly innovate to remain competitive, while Sony found their path to relevance through massive investments into their gaming architecture that often didn't pay off until the following console launch.
And our Christian walk follows the exact same expectation. While His grace is completely free, following Him always comes at a cost. Not because He is charging us, but because if we are following in His footsteps, then we will find that they will lead us on an identical journey of selflessness and sacrifice that He took during His path on this earth.
To avoid the mistake that Google made with Stadia, we must count the cost and accept there will be many parts of our journey that don't result in the level of measurable success that we had hoped for or planned on in the time frame we anticipated. Like a trip to the grocery store, we may look at our receipt and feel that what we're walking out with isn't immediately equivalent with the cost that we're paying. We can't expect immediate returns on earth for investments we're making into heavenly places.
For many of us, following the Lord's will may feel like we are investing our time, our efforts, and our lives into areas of seemingly diminishing returns. As His servants, we may devote our time and energy into projects that seem to only absorb our efforts and offer very little in the form of reward or even acknowledgement. But it is the purpose of a vessel to be filled up for the purpose of being poured out, as many times as is necessary for its purpose to be completed.
And if we count the cost with the understanding that carrying our cross often includes accepting loss on the side of the journey, we'll find that the exponential returns that await us on the other side of this equation will far outweigh the temporary sacrifices that we're making right now.